Okay, I'm ready.
Right. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Urbana City Council for Monday, January 11th, 2021. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Here.
Mr. Sachs,
Here.
Ms. Hersey,
Here.
Mr. Brown,
Here.
Mr. Roberts,
Here.
Mr. Colebrook,
Here.
Mr. Miller,
Here.
Mayor Marlin.
Here. Before we go farther, Eric, you're very faint when you've responded. Could you turn up your audio or move closer to your computer? That'll work.
How's this?
That's much better. Thank you. Okay. Approval of minutes of the previous meeting from January 4th, 2021. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve those minutes.
I'll second it.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Bill Colebrook. Any corrections? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
That motion passes. Any additions to the agenda? I don't believe there are any. I would like to ask the council if you would consider rearranging the order of the agenda so we could move the appointments up to be the next agenda item rather than waiting till the very end. That would be moving item I, new business, which is just the appointments to boards and commissions, up under item C.
Certainly, I'll make a motion that we do that, make the adjustment to the agenda and move the appointments up to, where is it that you indicated?
Actually next, so it'd be after item C.
Okay, there it is, after item C.
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Is that it? That motion passes. All right. I have before you tonight appointments for, I lost my agenda, appointments for 3 seats. 2 seats are on the Human Relations Commission, and then we have 1 for the Sustainability Advisory Commission. So for Human Relations, I'm recommending appointment of Julie Robinson Schaefer. These are both of these appointments for terms ending June 30th, 2023. So Julie Robinson Schaefer is a 19-year resident of Urbana, Associate Director for Negotiations in the Sponsored Programs Administration at the U of I at Urbana-Champaign. She provides leadership management to the negotiation section, research, interprets relevant regulations, guidelines, and standards. She believes in the health of the community, its members, and has a strong commitment to ensuring fair and equal access to housing, stable employment, and municipal services. And I will add, participating in the interviews for these 2 positions were the commission chair, Fran Resnick, and board member Fran Rigberg, and board member Pete Resnick. One of the things that struck us also when we interviewed Julie was her extensive experience in understanding contracts, interpreting the language, and dealing with a wide variety of people in the course of her work, all of which are useful skills and experience to have in the Human Relations Commission. The other candidate I'm recommending is Megan McKissick. She's a 3-year resident of Urbana. She's Director of Piatt County Services for Seniors. She has a Master's of Public Administration, a Bachelor's in Social Work, has trained several organizations over the past several years concerning elder abuse. So her specialty is in services to the elderly. She does fiscal management, manages volunteers. She trained people, including police officers, for educating them on responses to elder abuse. She also trained social service providers on the same topic. And she works now in adult protective services, and she's had extensive experience dealing with family members as well. So she has good background in an area dealing with the elderly population, and that's a nice complement to the other members of the commission. And she's concerned with using her skills to help explore, overcome systemic obstacles, including those related to discrimination based on age, disability, and race. So I'd appreciate a motion to appoint these two individuals to the Human Relations Commission.
Sure, I'd like to make that motion. I'd like to appoint, ratify and approve the appointment of Julie Robinson Schaefer and Megan McKissick to the Human Relations Commission.
Okay.
Second.
I will add that this commission has 9 members, so this brings it up to 8, and we'll still be searching for one more person to fill the vacancy on that commission. Is there any discussion? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
That motion passes. And then the third appointment is for the Sustainability Advisory Committee for the term ending June 30th, 2023. And I bring forward an appointment for James E. Corbin II. James is a 15-year resident of Urbana. He's actively involved with the First Followers Reentry Program as a project developer, facilitator, and mentor. He manages the daily activities of the intake center while working to assist formerly incarcerated individuals to become reestablished, flourish in the community. His interest in serving on the Sustainability Advisory Board stems from a concern for reducing our carbon footprint and a desire to represent a usually underrepresented segment of the population in these discussions. And I really welcome his willingness to serve on this board, and I think it will bring a different perspective than what's been on the board before. And as he said in his application, as a Native African American, we are usually underrepresented in such discussions within government, so I feel it's my responsibility to step up and engage more. That's why I'm placing myself in a position such as this, so I can become an advocate and recruiter for more underrepresented individuals, such as myself, to participate in the future. Is there a motion to get this on before the board?
I'll move that we approve James E. Corbin II for the Sustainability Advisory Committee.
Okay, is there a second?
I
I'll
think
second
Grace
that
is
motion.
trying to second.
Oh, who is?
Pardon?
Sharice?
I'll second.
He was
Okay.
muted.
Is there any discussion? Is that a hand? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just have a quick question. I'm wondering how many seats do we still have unfilled across all of our boards and commissions? Do you have an approximate number?
I don't right now, but I could get that number.
Okay, all right.
We have a fair number. We have 165 seats to keep filled for our boards and commissions, which is an extraordinary number for a city our size. And I think I just learned about another board the last couple of days that I didn't even know existed, and for which we are also responsible for filling a seat. It's a community-based board, but I can bring that next week.
Great.
Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
That motion passes. Thank you very much. Okay, we will move on to next item on the agenda, which are the public input and presentation section. We have a presentation first, which is on a proposed use of force policy. Just for logistics, we'll do a presentation by city staff on this with an introduction by Carol Mitten, the city administrator. We'll have council questions specific to the presentation. Then we'll take public input. We'll hear from members of the public and then follow up with council comments. Okay, Carol?
Thank you. We just have a couple slides, so let me start with that. Oops. Here we go. I don't know what I did to make it look like that, but.
Hey, Carol, just so you know, I think Jason Liggett is also prepared to run the slides tonight as well.
Oh, really? Okay, maybe that
So-
would be better.
Jason, if you could help us out, please. Thank you.
I'll wait for him to get that up.
Yeah, we're pulling it up now. Give us just a
Thanks,
moment.
Jason.
Uh-huh.
All right, so I have the first slide, well, after the title slide. So I wanted to begin the presentation on the revised use of force policy tonight with a little history of how we got here. You can flip the slide for me, Jason, if you would. Following the Aaliyah Lewis incident, we hired Hillard Hines to conduct an independent review of that incident. And one of the outcomes of that review was that both Hillard Hines and members of the community advised us to revisit our use of force policy and make changes. And we needed to bring our policy in alignment with the 10 shared principles adopted by the City Council as well. So on November 12th and 13th of last year, we held 3 listening sessions on the use of force policy. We received many comments during those listening sessions, as well as through our dedicated email address. We've tried to ensure folks that we heard their concerns and suggestions by producing the comment matrix that was posted with the agenda. First and foremost, I want to thank the public for their time and commitment to this topic. And we have many people in attendance tonight, and so I really appreciate people's continuing interest in this. I also want to thank Lamont Peppers, who facilitated the listening sessions, Lily Wilcock, who scribed the listening sessions, and Will Kolchowski, who developed the comment matrix for us. This reflects an extensive level of staff effort. Further, I want to thank Chief Bryant Seraphin and Deputy Chief Rich Searles for their time and investment in this policy rewrite. It has been a significant commitment of their personal time. We believe the time investment was warranted because of the local and national concerns regarding use of force by the police. And as Chief Seraphin can tell you, this revised policy reflects not only what we heard from our local community, but reflects model policies and best practices of other communities. So I'll let him take it from this point, and you can go ahead and flip the slide. There you go. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, council, citizens, and officers, and anyone else who's listening tonight or watching this in a recorded version. Before I actually get into the content of this slide, I wanted to just share a couple of opening remarks as well. I'm in my 27th year of doing policing in Urbana, Illinois, and these sort of guiding documents are sort of living and breathing, and they change over time. When I started, they handed me one 3-ring binder called a Rules and Regulations book. And then I had a book called Policies and Procedures. And then shortly thereafter, we changed that and they gave me a directives manual, sort of combining both of those. We then had probably lived under that director's manual for a while, but as many people know, we then moved to Lexapol. So we then were taking those things and trying to, how do we marry this and get these, all these documents sort of intertwined and so that they're rowing the same direction. And as Carol has said tonight, what you've had a chance to look at is an effort to try to get all of these recipes together and all of the cooks in the kitchen to try to come up with a document that reflects a lot of different concerns and is usable. Because I think that's very important here. This has to be a document that can be usable. We can't have a 500-page document with regards to this. Officers have to be able to synthesize this and use this effectively. So, as she has said, in addition to things like the listening sessions and public comments and emails and other police department references, we looked at the International Association of Chiefs of Police model policy, and some of the, and Hillard Hines, some of their input. And so all of these things, hopefully tonight, will be a document that we think is close. Is it exactly finished? That's why we're here tonight, to get a little bit more feedback. I see there's quite a few participants tonight, so we'll be able to hear. Matter of fact, I think since I've come down the room, I've gotten a couple more emails here. So we understand that, and I want to try to take this and again, try to make this the best that we can. As many of you are aware, of course, the state of Illinois legislature is working on some other police reforms right now. So of course, there yet would be another thing that we would try to push together and see how we can make all these things, these marry up. One of the things I wanted to do again here is sort of set a little bit of context of use of force. That in the last 10 years or so, we roughly have somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30,000 contacts every year. We use force in about 100 to 140 instances of those, if you will. And the one of the things that, you'll see on here, you see a couple of extra bullet points we added. We thought it might be sort of helpful just to make sure that everyone knows that a lot of these uses of force are relatively, these are a low frequency events. Granted, they're a high impact sort of occurrence on the citizen, and that it makes a difference, and that's one of the reasons why in this instance, this use of force policy we wanted to have out. For a comparison's sake, if someone's interested, of course, the old policy, if you will, is on the website within our policy manual, and then this new version, or the newest as of last week, it was also now on the website for citizens to review. I guess before I go to the next slide, I will just make a quick mention of this, and this will be a little bit later in there, but you'll see the review, field investigation, and some garbled letters, CCMJIT. That is the Champaign County Multi-Jurisdictional Investigative Team. So of the uses of force every year that we do have, all of them are reviewed by a supervisor. And it has been that way, that all of them have been reviewed. This summer, we reviewed how we reviewed them, and that document as well is included, I believe, in the packet of material that you have. Some uses of force rise to where we will do a field investigation, so there's extra fact gathering, and then some of the most extreme events, we would refer those to the Champaign County Multi-Jurisdictional Investigative Team, which is a team of local detectives supervised by Illinois State Police Special Agents. And so we can touch on that a little bit later, but that's sort of what those, bullet points mean. Next slide, please. I guess I cheated just a touch and made a few of these comments already. So we just so that everyone knows, because we're still open to comments. We want to try to, again, keep this process moving because we need to make sure that staff are aware of the changes and that we can get those implemented. We also would like to get this policy, needs to be certified through an executive order of the president back at the end of 2020. the use of force policy throughout departments throughout the United States had to get their policies certified so that the city can remain eligible for certain grant funding. And so we knew this was going on. As a matter of fact, when that sort of rolled out was right at around maybe Halloween, so we knew we had our listening sessions coming up. So that's why we're trying to get this done. And as I've said, they've changed over my years being here, and there will always probably some more change around the bend. Next slide, please. So quick overview, essentially with regards to some text, roughly that was about 8 pages before this. Right now it's sitting at about 13, 10 pages of actual policy on this, and then about a 3-page document with regards to the procedures with regards to how we would actually review these. What I hope everybody got a chance to sort of take a look at it. You will see as we kind of go through. One of the things that we had done here, and I'm just going to kind of go through this list of changes and refer to the document that I have in front of me. One of the things you'll see in a couple different places, if you check back and forth between two, we wanted to make sure, like for instance, in the policy statement under 300.2, that somewhere in there, Lexipol had the sentence, "The department recognizes and respects the value of all human life and dignity without prejudice to anyone." We needed to get that policy statement up. So one of the things you might notice is some things we just simply rearranged to make that point that this philosophical statement is important to us. Matter of fact, we're putting it number 1 right underneath that policy section. With regards to some of the other, some more substantive changes, you'll hear a lot about duty to intercede. That was there before, but that has been clarified and expanded upon. So there shouldn't be any confusion whether the officer someone were to see it in person or come across the information in some other fashion, perhaps in a body cam review. So we tried to expand some of those kinds of those things in that section. I'm gonna jump ahead here. Hillard Hines, the public at large, other police departments all had information in their policies regarding de-escalation, and ours was lacking. And I think I said that throughout last year. I think what you'll see before you now is much more robust with regards to de-escalation, going through defining de-escalation, even kind of going through the steps. And then, as a matter of fact, even I think there's a bullet pointed list here where we actually go into what are some of those actual, what are those techniques? A lot of times people use de-escalation and without maybe knowing exactly what that is. And so one of the things we wanted to make sure that anybody who read this would know these are the types of things that we're talking about when we say de-escalation. And so I think this really fleshes this out quite a bit more than we had before, where I think it was, like I said, lacking, and we feel that this is much, much better. We've also included a new section in there with regard to termination of use of force. And I think that we'll talk about some things even with regards to Hillard Hines and a couple of their concerns. So we hope we've addressed some of those things in there with regards to now the situation is under control and we need to stop. Medical considerations under 300.6 has quite a bit of text in it. I note that because another area that we wanted to try and beef up. There was quite a bit before as well, but certain things to make sure that we had covered. For instance, this is where you'll see some of the initial discussion with regards to the concept of extreme agitation or excited delirium, and being cognizant of the position of someone once they've been placed, if we have them and we're taking them into custody. what position are they in, and try to speak in some plain language. And so you'll see some references in that with regards to the providing the first aid, getting medical attention on the way, arranging for transportation. And then you'll see some other references in there with regards to the medical concerns as well. Something that we had changed before, officers always wrote about uses of force in their police reports. But now we have put an active duty to notify their supervisors when they do that. And that you'll see right under 300.7. And then that refers to the changes to the use of force reviews. I'll get into that in just a second. 300.8 is a section regarding the use of force, the field investigations that the sergeants would do. So if you recall back to one of the first slides that we had on there, there was all of the uses of force are reviewed, and then if you will narrow the funnel, if you will, some of those the sergeant, if the field supervisor, in most cases that's a sergeant, not always, and there's some language to help to differentiate why if that sergeant's involved per se. But those field supervisors would then, when do they have to do a use of force investigation? And there, I believe, were 7 conditions in the old policy as to when we wanted that to occur. This one actually, we've almost doubled that to 13 different situations where we want that sergeant to come out and to make some of those initial assessments and collect that information. So that's, I guess, the first half of 300.8. When you move into the second half of 300.8, you notice it switches to Roman numerals, and in there, that's actually helping to guide that sergeant. But what do we want you to do when you conduct this investigation? And so these are some specific steps we want them to take. And so within that policy, you'll see it's fairly concrete with regards to what we want them to do. And you'll see, for instance, in Roman numeral 2, which is just to conduct that actual investigation. And most police investigations usually consist of 4 basic building blocks. And they're going to talk to, in this particular, they're going to review a statement or information from the officer, information from the subject upon whom force was used, and then information from any witnesses. And then finally, any crime scene physical evidence concerns, whether that's body camera, surveillance camera, clothing, blood, weapons, any of those kinds of things that we want to make sure that it gets taken care of right away. And so that's where we have this, the officers, the supervisors conducting those field level investigations as soon as they can. And I think that one other thing that I wanted to mention here, you'll see the use of force review board. That there's a separate policy on that, and we're that is changes there remain to be completed yet, but we wanted to at least mention it in this particular policy. And finally, there's some of the procedural changes with regards to when we conduct use of force investigations versus reviews. And if you actually, if you're moving along with me, the last page actually does a pretty good job of when we do sort of saying these are the steps. Under page 3, you'll see 3 columns, and it kind of guides the reader through use of force when we're going to have a field. We're not going to do a field investigation. A simple review is appropriate because it's very low level use, a mid-range level use, and there's some additional steps. And then if it rises to a more substantial level, if there's a deadly force encounter, an incident, those types of things, that would be that third and final column. Thank you, Jason, for the slides. You can take that down. That's the overview of this that I wanted to give everyone tonight. And then I wanted to answer questions and see if there's clarifying, any way I can clarify it. So.
Are there questions for Chief Seraphin? Jared. Jared.
couple of things. I guess we're gonna, Diane, you had said we're gonna do comments later.
I'm asking for council questions
Okay.
related to the policy, and then I wanted to get public input for comments, and then we'll go back to council for comments.
Okay. So questions. One thing that had struck me just as a grammatical inconsistency is the use of the word individual, subject, and/or person kind of interspersed throughout. I know there were instances in some where subject was replaced with individuals in the new one from the old one, and then in other instances it was the opposite where it said individual and it was replaced with subject. Is there a method to the madness that's going on there, or does there just need to be some editing consistency in the final document?
I'll tell you that I think that's more likely an artifact of multiple people working on this and again, several cooks in the kitchen. So yeah, if we think we need to, and we've had multiple reads over this document, but yeah, I think that's mostly probably just an artifact of too many cooks in the kitchen, perhaps, Jared.
Okay, I've got a couple others, but I'm sure others have some as well. I just wanted to ask that one because it had stood out to me immediately.
Mary Alice.
Thank you, Brian and Carol and everybody else who is involved with this process. This is a huge undertaking. I think, in my opinion, the two big things that the public is interested in is the de-escalation and also in the misuse of force. So I just want to talk about those two things first. So I think it's great that we now have a pretty robust information about de-escalation. In the very first part of the policy, 300.3, where we talk about just what is the use of force, there's a sentence that says tactical de-escalation should be used whenever feasible. And I'm wondering if we can make it a little bit stronger and basically say tactical de-escalation should be used first before force whenever feasible. So we really emphasize that de-escalation is a priority within the policy when it's possible. So that's kind of my first, I guess it's a comment, it's not a question. I wanted to know if what your thoughts were on that. If you want to take that back to the group that's working on that, that's fine, you can say that, but.
You know, Mary Alice, and that's, matter of fact, this is one of those things as we work through this and the Lexipol web interface, you write on it and you work on it, you accept, and then you make more changes, and then gather, and people are doing this, and we've had subsequent meetings, and then we wait a minute, well, they don't have Lexipol sign-ons, we got to get them a PDF to read it, and so no, I'm not offended by that. I think there's always, one of the things that you'll see is that always and never types of things are always kind of, not a huge fan. And so what I want to make sure is, and so like some feedback, like you said there, is reasonable.
And my second question has to do with misuse of force. So I did look up the disciplinary policy because the disciplinary policy is separate from the use of force. And of course, there's multiple different kinds of use of force, from pulling out your gun but not using it to ultimately, which would be horrible if there was actually a shot. So I'm wondering, I'm just trying to figure out how this relates to the disciplinary policy. How this policy.
Yeah, so essentially what happens is, and that's sort of why that procedural last guideline is pages, or those last three, that the rewrite we did was important. So that we get a sense of is, again, and I know that was one of the, I say this, you'll hear me say it tonight, and it's not necessarily reasonable is the standard. And I want to, and what is reasonable, and that varies depending on the situation, the skills of the subject, the skills of the officer, and all sorts of other factors. So you'll hear me say that tonight, and it's not that I guess I'm trying to avoid anything, but I just want to say that's the language of the case law on this topic. with regards to whether the force was reasonable or not, then we would go into and look into how unreasonable was it. And as we try to, so with the use of force review, they would say, it's unreasonable. I'll use an example as a traffic crash matrix. And I think it was my friend Charisse, who, when we were talking about some stuff before, was, do you have a matrix for this? And that's, well, if there's this much damage to the car and it's their first offense, then they get this. And it was quite a lot of acrobatics to try to build that. In this particular case, when it comes to a lot of our discipline, is it unreasonable? And if it is, then, well, how unreasonable? What are the circumstances? What are all the other bits that flow into this? What do we have to consider as an aggravating factor? What is a mitigating factor? And it's those sorts of issues that come into play later. So first, is it unreasonable? And then to what degree? And that's how we kind of wedge it into or deal with the disciplinary policy.
So I think in the disciplinary policy, it talks about training, kind of getting written up on administrative leave. It keeps escalating, right? And so forth. And you don't have to answer this right now, but I think it would be interesting to take this policy a little bit and at least talk about the administrative leave. When is it reasonable under some kind of scenarios, when it would be reasonable to put somebody on administrative leave in terms of a violation of use of force? But as I said, that probably will take a little bit of time to think about. I'll hold off on my rest of my questions and let other people have an opportunity.
Charisse and then Dennis.
Hi, Brian.
Hello, Charisse.
I just wanted to thank you for going through this, your use of force policy, and breaking down, everything so that your average citizen can kind of understand what's going on. But the other thing I wanted to add, well, not add, but have you considered, because when I look at your de-escalation techniques, and one of the things that I have mentioned before is that maybe, just like an officer has to Mirandize people when they're placed under arrest, that maybe there should be something where an officer, as a de-escalation technique, explains to maybe in the process, of all this. And I know that stuff can pop off in a minute, in a second, but using something to the equivalent of, I really need you to put your hands up. So instead of just put your hands up, it's like, I really need you to put your hands up so that I know I can be safe and you will be too. And try to actually engage the individual into cooperating on some level. I know I want to hear your explanation, sir, but I really need to put, handcuffs on you so that you will be safe and I will be too, type of verbal talk. Is that
Sure.
to, considering, and of course it would be dependent upon any kind of situation, but to even have that kind of thing written into the de-escalation technique of, I think it makes a difference if a person doesn't feel like they are a criminal first off.
So, so sort of what you've done is begin to go down the road of the verbal judo instruction manual.
Okay.
One of the tenets of verbal judo is people want to be asked, not told. And so that is one of the tenets that we teach. I guess I will just say specifically with regards to some of this, I thought so for instance, so you've sort of described, I glanced down as you were talking, persuasion, or even building rapport, something that officers, that we want them to do. And depending on a variety of circumstances, and you'll see something on, I think that is on page 5 as well, distance plus cover equals time. Time is something that really helps to dictate the effectiveness and how we can use de-escalation. And if we have distance between us and the subject, if we have cover, that helps to give us time. Now, as those variables change, maybe we don't, but so what you've talked about, Sharice, is like I said, you started to go down the road of exactly what some of the concepts are in verbal judo. I think our policy here, we want to name those. I don't think we're going to necessarily be able to teach the verbal judo methodology or verbal persuasion or whatever the current exact name is. But by God, 27 years ago, it was verbal judo. But that's kind of it's exactly what you've talked about. And that is what the officers are trained in. I think with regards to policy, as long as we've at least mentioned, these are some of these 8 things like the persuasion, like empathy. I think we're down the right track, at least for a policy.
I just, I just think it would be good on some level. I know I see the, lines of communication, maintaining open lines of communication between officers and communicating effectively with the subject are critically important. And so, I know how society and cultures evolve as years go on. 30 years ago, it was being hard on crime or whatever. And now we're actually trying to be more human with crime. So
Right.
I was just thinking that maybe in giving some of those examples of the verbal warning, persuasion, diffusion, empathy, redirecting, if you offer at least a sentence
Sure.
or something that could possibly be used by the police to just, and they can come up with their own, but to think in
Right.
terms regarding whatever the situation is what you would be able to use.
So, yeah, and I guess there might be, so I think what the question is there a way with some of my verbal judo experts, can we give some examples or beef this up a little bit more and get a little more text on there instead of just a laundry list of the different techniques, but to get a little more.
This is a good example of, just like you give us examples of particular scenarios that may happen so that we can get an idea of what officers go through. I would just like to see, 1 or 2 examples of something an officer might be able to say to calm a person down.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from Dennis?
You're muted.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to have a little bit of a clarification on one of the items that is in a list on page 3, factors used to determine the reasonableness of force, which seems to me a difficult area to act upon in a thoughtful way. And that is when the person that has been stopped appears to be ready to fly or decides to flee the area rather than to interact with the police. What techniques is the police force interested in pursuing as far as a subject that begins to run?
I think Dennis, it sort of will depend on the variety of several different factors. So for instance, if indeed it's a bank robbery that occurred or the gas station was robbed and we come out and it's a suspect description is white male with a green shirt and I'm nearby and I'm there and I see the police and I take off running, that's a factor that we can consider to indeed say, yes, indeed, this is somebody who he matches the description, he's in the area, and et cetera, et cetera. Flight alone is a slightly different scenario, and that's, I think, what we're trying to show you. This is these are all of the factors to consider, and so I try to parse one out exactly. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be totally useful, but again, there are court cases with regards to flight alone in certain areas where time is, where crime has happened and there have been certain things, and flight alone is a factor. So I guess it's just this list, whatever, I think it wasn't under R or something, is rather extensive to try to come up with all the different factors.
Yeah, I know. I mean, but you're going to run into this. I mean, there may be a person who, you know, the police are questioning because they're standing on somebody's lawn, say, or something. You know, maybe there's been a call, possible trespass or something. If the person is not wanting to interact with you and it starts to run behind the house, I mean, what's the response of the police department? Are they going to get in their cop car and go around to the next block to intercede them? Are they going to send somebody to run after the individual and tackle them? I'm interested in knowing how one ends up using force of a person who's already got like 25 feet ahead of you, who's running in the other direction. Partly because there have been officers in other parts of the country who've shot people. But we're not interested in having, you know, those kinds of experiences here.
No, I understand that. I don't think so. If the scenario that you're giving me is one of this is just flight alone for no apparent reason in any way, somebody sees the officer and turns and starts jogging and then takes off into a full sprint and runs away. No, that is nothing that I've described in that situation alone warrants some sort of deadly use of force.
Right.
Flight coupled with other factors might require a higher level of response.
Do you let the person just disappear, or what happens next? You call other officers to the scene and they are looking for the person individually now?
Well, I think again, I guess I'll go back to if we believe this subject was just involved in a shootout, and we have the reason, and they see the police and they run and they hide, then we'll set up a perimeter. We might try to introduce a canine into the situation. So it's sort of, I guess it's very fact specific with regards to what our response might be.
Okay, just thought I'd ask. It's an interesting point for me to wonder
Sure.
about.
Any other council members have a question? I want to make sure everyone who hasn't had a chance yet, Jared first. No other hands. Is that Eric? Okay.
Out of curiosity, what is the de-escalation training for the force?
So it's a verbal persuasion, I think is actually what it's called now. It's 8 hours at the Police Training Institute where they're first exposed to that. What's interesting about the timeline, when you have 14 weeks of training, they try to front load that 8 hour block. I don't know if it's all at once or 2 4-hour blocks, but they try to get that introduction in early on. They do that so that as the training progresses, they can then utilize some of the concepts that they've learned. And so when you move on to other events throughout your training, whether you're doing there's a whole recipe, if you will, for how to conduct a traffic stop and what the correct lingo should be. And so all of those things, so they'll use those throughout. They'll use them, they'll do them throughout. They have little mock apartments, living dwellings where the officers will then get to practice their techniques on role players. Upon graduation, then the officers continue to use those during the field training time. We then have some sort of an annual refresher where we do some sort of verbal judo type event, refresher training. Might be an hour or two. Sometimes it's video work. Sometimes it's other more hands-on type materials. So the basic training, though, does occur at the Police Training Institute.
Okay. Any other questions from people who haven't asked yet? Okay, we'll go to Jared then.
Chief, in actually, before I ask that, I wanted to ask, because this is a draft and it's not fully finished yet, are we going to get one more presentation of this after this session tonight to see it in its final form before it turns into an approved policy?
I'm hoping to politely say no, that we'll be able to get this feedback in and get this, because I want to try to get it to that certifying body so that they can. I don't want to see us get stuck behind some sort of weird date thing with regards to any kind of grant funding. So, but I guess that's my short response.
Okay, well, not my intention to keep that from happening. Just to say that even if it needs to become finalized in order to get that done,
Right.
that at least, because it's not like it doesn't, we can't go back and look at it again after that's over. It's just,
Right.
you have a formal process that needs to be done prior, and I understand that. But so whether or not it happens beforehand, I still think that it would be good to say, okay, here was everything that we saw from the last one. Here are the changes that we took into consideration. Even if it doesn't come in a council meeting, even if it's just emailed to us to say, hey, we took these things into consideration. Here, on page 4, we changed, this should to shall. We changed, we added this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, just to see what's come from the input given tonight. Because I know that there's a lot of folks, even after council is done with their comments, who have got a lot to say on this. And I would also, actually that's a comment, I'm gonna save that. So question.
I will answer that. That sounded like a question, and yes, there will be another updated version circulated so people can see that it reflects the comments that were made tonight as much as possible.
Great. Was going to lead into a comment, but I'm going to keep it with a question. So one question is now I got to go find it again. 300.2.1, duty to interceding reports. First instance, any officer present and observing another law enforcement officer or member using force that is clearly blah, 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 blah. What is the purpose of the or a member? Is there supposed to be something that follows after that, or a member of law enforcement, or I'm confused.
Fair enough. And that's a lexipol artifact. So they have some lingo. When you come on board, you use certain you fill out certain surveys. We have this, we have that, and then they push that in there. I can't tell you exactly. Member of the police department. So that could be just another sort of grammatical thing that we could knock out. But yes, that's all. It's a lexipol artifact.
Okay, so doesn't necessarily need to be in there. The or a member.
Yeah, I'd have to double check and see at somewhere in the beginning it defines member. So I suppose one might argue that if a front desk clerk were to see something, they have a duty to at least report as well. But I'd have to go back and actually double check exactly the definition of how member is decided.
Okay. Another one was, can you try and clarify the intention of paragraph 3 under 300.3, given that no policy can predict every possible situation, officers are entrusted to use well-reasoned discretion in determining the appropriate use of force in each incident to include principles of tactical de-escalation. Because to me, that kind of sounds like they're allowed to disregard de-escalation, but I don't know. I'm confused about the intention of that paragraph. Can you elaborate?
Sure. I believe, and I guess I wouldn't try to overread too much. Officers are supposed to use their discretion to determine the appropriate force to include principles of de-escalation, even though no policy can predict every situation. So even though we can't necessarily, somebody had said certain examples, and that's usually how we do a lot of some of the instruction on this. There's discussion here about chokeholds, and the banning of chokeholds and those kinds of things. And I'm sure there'll be some discussion tonight with the people who are lined up to talk. They're banned unless someone is choking you out and about to kill you. Then the officer has to do whatever they can. So that's sort of, I think, what the reference is in the beginning of that sentence.
Okay, I mean, I'm just, you know, a lot of people have mentioned to me, you know, about how the policy just doesn't seem to prioritize de-escalation. And I feel like without ruining or really changing the intention of even that particular instance where you talk about de-escalation, it just seems after the fact to me rather than to the, you know, I could definitely find a way to reword that says, you know, using well-reasoned discretion to utilize principles of tactical de-escalation, you know, first and foremost, whenever possible, when determining the appropriate use of force to an incident or something along those lines.
Sure, I got it.
The intention of it, but it, you know, it's important how we phrase those things, because this is another question. This is, you know, a guiding document that all officers must use and know and be familiar with to be, you know, considered fully trained and able to work in our police department. Correct?
Correct. I hear what you're saying, and that makes sense to me. So thank you.
Thanks.
Made a note, and I got some arrows going. So.
Okay, if there's no more questions, okay, I want to move on to public input pretty soon. Mary Alice?
Great. I have two questions, and
Okay.
one of them, okay, so I'll take the, I don't know if it's the easy one. So one of the things that struck me in the use of force to effect an arrest, which is 300.3.1, I don't know what page it's on, it referenced an IICLS policy at the Illinois, it's an Illinois law. The thing that struck me was that the very first sentence, an officer may use any force which they reasonably believe to be necessary to effect an arrest. So the phrase any force kind of struck me. So I went and looked up that law, and the law itself actually has that sentence word for word. But in addition to that, it also has this kind of however with deadly force. And so I thought, I don't want to make the policy really, really long, but I thought that that was really important to include, especially since we're talking about deadly force. Do you know what I'm talking about, Brian?
Yeah, I know. And I know, as a matter of fact, during our review of this, we went and did the exact same thing. Let's pull up the Illinois compiled statutes. Let's look at this. Let's read it. And because we're like, is that exactly what that says? And
Yes.
Yep, that's exactly what the law says. I'd have to compare it to the deadly force portion under 300.4, Mary Alice, because I know that there's multiple bits in there that talk about using deadly force, and perhaps maybe we need to just repeat some of it. However, maybe there's we can do that at 300.3.1. We didn't want to necessarily repeat everything again, so I know 300.4 is specifically on the deadly force application, though.
Okay. And then my last question, I'll just make it quick, is I'm wondering if you have any have the officers seen this? And if they have, is there any quick reaction to it?
So we gave them an opportunity to give us all of their feedback as well. Like we're going through this. We're getting feedback from citizens, Champaign, Urbana, or wherever. The council's given feedback. We've had listening sessions. What say you? And I know some officers have spoken and talked. They have not yet even seen this particular document that you guys are seeing tonight yet. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We'll take one more council question and move on to public input. Dennis.
The other thing that was really important for me to ask about, I think it's missing right at the very beginning when you have definitions. I think it's really important that we include a definition for de-escalation. I know you have a section for it later on, and I wondered, it just seems so important in the discussion of our community right now that have you thought about adding just defining de-escalation and putting that word right there in the definitions at the very beginning of this, because I think the importance is that of that technique is that important.
I don't disagree with that. I will tell you that those definitions with a lot of that is Lexipol. Some of that is, I think most of that actually is Lexipol stock language. So we try, when we don't have to manipulate too much of their stuff, we'll leave it alone and then go into our definition later, but we can clearly add a definition up at that section as well. That's easy enough.
Really
That's easy enough to accomplish.
You would empower the direction that the community wants, and I
Okay.
request that, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right, if council has more questions, we'll get to them afterwards, but let's move on to public input. So if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand and leave it up, and we'll get to everybody. First up is Danielle Chenoweth.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Danielle Chenoweth. I live at 412 West Illinois Street in Urbana and have lived in Urbana since 1995. I serve as a Cunningham Township Supervisor. First off, I just want to say that this use of force policy is controlled by the residents of Urbana through a majority of their council members voting to direct the chief of police to produce a policy that meets community expectations. And I strongly encourage you not to be persuaded by claims of rushing this, that this has been a long process and it needs to go through a proper process. And I would encourage you to give direction to the staff because ultimately they're accountable to you through the appointment process. To meet community expectations, I believe the use of force must do the following things. It's very important that it go beyond shielding the city and police from litigation and provide clear boundaries and consequences. If you look at this use of force policy and thought of it as maybe a personnel policy or a sexual harassment policy, every other policy that you read is much more definitive than this policy, which has a lot of may and a lot of choice and discretion built in. Second, the policy needs to mandate de-escalation in all cases where it can safely be done, which is the vast majority of interactions. So I'm disturbed to hear that de-escalation makes up 1.4% of the initial police training time. Third, the policy must include a prohibition on use of force when resistance is passive, verbal or walking away, rather than active, making or attempting to make harmful physical contact or displaying a weapon. In November 11th, when the police pulled behind his van, Calvin Miller, Martell Miller's son, panicked and fled toward his mother's home. He was pursued by Champaign police on foot, handcuffed, beaten, and pepper sprayed. The only thing he did was to flee, panicked, and frightened by the police. On June 2011, Brandon Ward was stopped when jaywalking on Campustown. He was pepper sprayed, and when asked why, the officer said it was because you were jaw-jacking. Number 4, the use of force policy should use deadly, officers using deadly force should consider danger to bystanders. This policy should prohibit blind shooting into houses or cars. In 2007, Champaign police fired into the home of Ms. Mildred Davis, a 62-year-old grandmother, while she and her 2-year-old great-grandson were in the line of fire. Police had chased a fleeing armed suspect who was a stranger to Ms. Davis into her home, and even though they were told children were inside, they fired about 30 bullets into the house. On New Year's Eve in 2014, the U of I police officers fired bullets into the carload of African-American youth, wounding 2 people. One of them shot twice in the back. Number 5, it is important in this use of force policy that pain compliance is strictly prohibited to be used as punishment or retaliation. In 2004 and 2005, Sergeant William Allen Myers tortured 2 people in our county jail that we became aware of. Michael Rich, a student from Chicago, and Ray Hassai, a resident struggling with mental illness. In both cases, deputies put them in restraints and then tasered them with an electroshock stun gun as punishment. There is some evidence that a similar punishment model of tasering was used against Ms. Lewis. Number 6, brandishing a weapon should be clearly a use of force. And 7, you need to strictly prohibit sexist, racist, or disrespectful language. I will send this to you as a written document. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next on the list is Alan Axelrod.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Alrighty. So for those who don't know, my name is Alan Max Axelrod. I'm the campaign lead of No Hammer Shutoffs, a $0 all-volunteer grassroots campaign of 51 organizations and counting, spanning the state, north and south, east and west. We have won 4 statewide moratoria on utility shutoffs. I'm also the co-chair of the Champaign-Urbana Democratic Socialists of America. A pessimist is either always right or pleasantly surprised, and I hate being right. One of the comments made earlier today is what police are going through as one of the emphasis of discussion. How about we instead focus on the people, that's all of us, on the other side of that power dynamic? This is a charade. I don't see my comment from the November 12th listening session embodied in the document that was provided, but it seems to have escaped the quantity over quality process embodied here. For the police chief's cost alone, we could house 25 of our 140 HUD homeless community members year round. For reference, here is my comment.
Police Chief Serafin had said was that de-escalation was not the top priority when there was a gun believed to be present. And I would actually strongly disagree that if there's a weapon present, there is an increased impetus for de-escalation. And under no circumstances should that ever be made secondary.
Nowhere else in your report do you talk about that being a top priority. I also commented about domestic violence. Nowhere else in those notes is it found. Did you select who you were taking these notes from? Because it looks that way. How can you propose this as money well spent? I don't think any reasonable person would say that's money well spent, whether they be true progressives, libertarians, or socialists. Some time ago, I commented at the city council when misinformation was provided to the Bloomington City Council using information so comically wrong that the legal counsel here categorized Ameren, Illinois, a public utility, as a private utility. I commented at that time to this city council that if you were driven by values and rigor, none of the pressure that we have been applying would have been necessary for you to unanimously pass a resolution on utility shutoffs. So I asked myself, why would more city council persons in Champaign, that is 4, is more than the number in Urbana City Council, which is a less progressive reputation than Urbana, sign on to a letter calling for the suspension of evictions? I'm at a loss how far we've fallen as a community in terms of the quality of our representation. Lastly, I show up, as many activists do, to community members in duress. You cannot out-train an abuser. Your abusers need therapy. Ask Courage Connection. This information is from their seminar on it. Late last year, your police gaslit a survivor whose landlord was operating so far out of ordinance that the Urbana's inspectors' list of violation were pages long. This performative reform is further proof that this city council seems to, and I would very much love to be wrong, lack the rigor and values that we need. And the police department deserves to be defunded. They decried a House bill on their Facebook page, but said nothing about the attempted coup. This is unacceptable. They protect and serve their own from their own receipts. You are the ones continuing the class war with this performative veneer. Have a good evening.
Carol Spindell.
Hi, actually Minnie and I are presenting together. Is it possible for Minnie to go first?
Sure.
Is she up? Thanks so much.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for listening tonight. I went through the document and read quite a bit. Actually, Mary Alice and I are basically on the same page with some things that she brought to your attention first. I will not speak for the entire time, and I will yield the rest of my time to Carol because we prepared some things together. But I did want to ask about on the use of force 3003. The tactical de-escalation should be used whenever feasible. The word feasible also kind of troubled me. I thought it was a bit weak. And so I thought a better word would be shall would be better in that sentence. And also I did not see any reference or penalties for violating this policy once it's final. So I would like to see some things like that in it. And also, how would you, as police officers, be able to determine whether a person that you have come in contact with has a mental illness problem? Thank you. And I'll yield the rest of my time to Carol. We prepared for it.
Well, actually, our council rules don't allow for yielding time, but we'll start the clock over at 4 minutes.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, okay, am I muted? I think I'm, or can you hear
No, we
me?
can hear you, Carol.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm speaking on behalf of Champaign County ACLU and NAACP Champaign County branch. We are deeply disappointed in this draft for a new use of force policy. The new policy does now contain a section on de-escalation, and this is an important policy update. But overall, this policy fails to accomplish the purpose of protecting the public from excessive use of force or other misconduct by police, nor is it designed to substantially diminish the number of incidents in which force is used. And really, this is a policy for the 20th century, not the 21st. The criteria used to decide whether police use of force was reasonable is whether it was, quote, reasonable from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene at the time of the incident. This policy doesn't fit Urbana in 2021. We can't go into every concern we have about the new policy here, but let's start with the definition of force. The new policy defines force as the application of physical techniques or tactics, chemical agents, or weapons to another person. It's unclear what application means in this context. We believe force should be defined as any effort to control, restrain, compel, or overcome the resistance of another person, including the use of physical force and suggested use of force, such as unholstering or brandishing a weapon at another person. The new policy defines deadly force as, quote, force reasonably anticipated and intended to create a substantial likelihood of causing death or very serious injury. The definition of deadly force should not include intent. Deadly force can turn out to be deadly whether intended or not. We believe deadly force should be defined as any use of force that creates a substantial risk of causing death or serious bodily injury to another, including but not limited to the discharge of a firearm or any weapon that in the manner of its use is capable of causing death or serious bodily injury. The new policy relies throughout on the standard of what an officer believes is reasonable, rather than ensuring that force is used only when necessary. Of course, every officer must use their own judgment in difficult situations, but they need consistent guidelines. And we recommend that the policy guidelines stress that force must always be objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportional. We're going to put this statement up on our website, aclu-cu.org, and our Facebook page, and there's a lot more details about language that we think should be added and that should be changed. The use of force policy could not be more important. It lays out the standards to which officers must adhere and the criteria by which their actions will be judged. It's also a statement about culture, values, and respect for human life. It should align with the values of Urbana. We urge you to extend this process in order to develop a new use of force policy that clearly and consistently expresses the professional values and policies the Urbana community wants its police department to embrace and adhere to. And the ACLU and NAACP leadership have not been engaged in this process in a substantive dialogue, although we have offered to, and we would very much like to meet with you for a more substantive exchange on these details. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And can you please email those comments to us as well?
Will do.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next up is Tracy Chung.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Tracy Chong from Urbana. So other speakers are making good points about the use of force policy updates. So I'll comment on Mayor Marlin's outburst last meeting asking residents to bring facts when speaking at public input. It was truly a double standard when speaking about facts and honesty. In the last 10 months, the mayor has ran up quite a list of dishonest remarks and exaggerations made to suit whatever narrative she's trying to push. On March 23rd, during City Council meeting via Zoom, Mayor Marlin suddenly announced that the public was not allowed to speak during the public input session, even though instructions on how to speak were clearly on the agenda. According to Marlin, quote unquote, due to technical difficulties and the fact that this is a learning process for all of us, public input will be taken tonight via email. When inquiries were made, the city could not provide evidence of technical difficulties and even tried to hide relevant emails requested via FOIA. However, after these emails were finally released, it became clear that this move was premeditated. The mayor had already decided on March 20th and told city staff that she did not want the public to speak on March 23rd. Then Alia Lewis was attacked by Urbana police officers, and to support Chief Seraphin's narrative of an active shooter incident, Mayor Marlin said that, quote unquote, a bullet went up over the heads of bystanders and through the window. To date, there has been no evidence that a bullet went over the heads of bystanders. Even last meeting, she said there were bullets, which is not true. There was a bullet found. When the FOIA problems arose and residents complained about exorbitant fees, Marlin announced to the public that Urbana had the statutory authority to charge the fees, that there were only 2 recurrent requesters and only these 2 people were charged these fees. This is not true. More people have been designated as recurrent requesters and more people have been charged the crazy fees. When Urbana lost a recent lawsuit, Mayor Marlin released a press release that was written to mislead the public, where she blamed other agencies for the lawsuit loss. Urbana never had reasons necessary based on the statutory exemptions, but still denied the FOIA requests. Urbana even tried to withhold a police record due to private information, when the correct way of dealing with these types of exemptions is by redacting as necessary. There was no excuse for this fully denying a police record, which is public record. Blaming other agencies in the press release was extremely dishonest. During the FOIA presentation on October 5th, Mayor Marlin chimed in and described a huge burdensome FOIA request where she said, quote unquote, it ended up being about 1,400 pages printed and the requester requested paper copies. This is not true. The 1,400 pages were provided to the requester via Dropbox. Nothing was printed. Last meeting, Mayor Marlin said that the reason Urbana was so terrible with handling this year's FOIA request was due to the huge increase in the volume and size of FOIAs. Now let's look at the data that we have. In 2019, Urbana received 702 FOIA requests. In 2020, they received 732 FOIA requests, making it a 4.3% increase, which is within range and not even the highest year-over-year increase in the past 5 years. Blaming the hurdles set by city staff and city legal on a huge increase is so dishonest. As for the size of FOIAs, I would like to know how the city has quantified this. and if it's even relevant, since the city has been denying for your requests that they deem complicated. Taken together, these don't seem to be isolated incidents of dishonest statements. I actually have more, but time's up, uttered in the heat of the moment. Even when pointed out, Mayor Marlin has not corrected any of these statements or provided evidence to back up the statements. I think this is very reflective of our mayor's character.
Next up is Eddie Pratt, Jr.
Good evening. Can y'all hear me straight?
Yes.
Good. Well, I hope everybody's staying safe and all affairs are in order. Going forward, one thing I wanted to focus on is the use of force policy 300.4B, particularly speaking about using deadly force being, an okay thing when a subject is fleeing. Now we've all lived 2020, and we all know the hellscape of which 2020 has brought us. But when it comes to that particular part of the use of force, we have seen how that has played out. And I would urge this department to rethink how they want to go forward with such a thing on their use of force procedures. More than anything else, alongside with that, I had a chance to look over the revised draft of the use of force, and the biggest problem to me is the flippant language being used within it, which empowers those with implicit bias to use their position to victimize whoever, whenever, however they please. This is the problem in modern policing, and this is what needs reform. This is what makes racial implications real. When you use things like believe or may or anything like that, it allows police to have room for doubt. And room for doubt creates a vacuum in which that particular officer can use anything that they feel like to empower their position to use it against the person in question. So if they believe they have a weapon, doesn't mean that they do have a weapon, doesn't mean that they have any kind of real reasoning to believe that they do. But in their mind, that's what they feel, and that's what they're gonna write, and they're gonna fire, and they're gonna kill that person, and then we're gonna be back here again like we was in the summer of 2020, mourning a Black and brown person's death over implicit bias. This language is problematic, to say the least, and tragic at the worst. So, though it's only a draft, I would suggest that the powers that be who create this use of force policy go back to the drawing board and rethink how they are how they want police to interact in the public. It's hard for me to really try to stay calm about, because I know what it can lead to, and I've seen these examples play out in my own life, and I hope that it doesn't play out for anyone else. But police need more rigid actions. They need more rigid use of force policies, because with that rigidness, we can actually police and not just, you know, kill people, we feel like. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Brian Dunn.
This is Megan. You accidentally unmuted me instead, so you can go to Brian.
Okay, thanks. Brian Dunn.
Hello, my name is Brian. I'm from Champaign, Illinois. And just regarding, you know, the whole use of force policy, I'm sitting here with a book called Police Crisis Intervention. It's from 1972, and it's from the Police Training Institute of the University of Illinois. You know, some stuff out of this book from 1972. When the police practitioner's insight, energy, and behavior is directed toward the symptoms only, not only is there an opportunity for an acceleration of the problem, but more importantly, the root cause may be completely overlooked. Also, if the police officer enters the picture and begins to harangue the individual about the way he is acting, all that has occurred is for the individual to experience treatment that he has experienced before. It goes on to talk about how that's actually, you know, detrimental to the whole process of policing, especially in a crisis situation. And, you know, just reading through this book and seeing the video of what happened to Alea Lewis, I think it's safe to say that the Urbana Police Department is at least 50 years behind what police know they should be doing. And so I think that having them kind of draft up these use of force policies is an act of futility. And, you know, any policy that the police goes through should definitely be crafted by the people. And, you know, just stopping at use of force, you know, just for thinking for the future is never going to be enough. And we have to seriously just rethink the way policing is done in this country. During the presentation, the chief talked about how the police had 25 to 30,000 contacts a year. How many of those need to be police contacts? How many of those need to be people who have the salary, the equipment, the training costs of police, you know, and how many of those 30,000 contacts could be better handled by somebody with different training, with better training, or even with less training, and could be paid less, and we would have more resources to spend on other things. So, you know, this whole thing with what was presented today, I don't even think that brings us up to what police were learning about in 1972. And I think that it's embarrassing that this is what we have come up with, especially after the year that we've had. I don't see anything in that presentation that would stop what happened to Alea Lewis from occurring again, especially with how vague the language is and how much leeway the officers get. You know, letting police officers determine what is reasonable. I think that we can determine that police officers don't always have a great understanding of what is reasonable, especially looking at who is supporting these conspiracy theories like QAnon, and, you know, who is perpetrating all these, you know, brutal offenses against Black Americans. I think that the police department can do a lot better, but also it's not up to them. It's up to you, the city council, to hold the police accountable and to make sure that they draft policy that serves the people. And they shouldn't even be the ones drafting the policy. We should be the ones drafting the policy. Thank you.
Next up is Megan McDonald.
Alrighty, can you hear me?
Yes.
Alrighty, my name is Megan McDonald and I live and work in Ward 5. There's a lot I could speak on given how last week's meeting turned out and all the national news in between now and then. However, in the short amount of time I have, I specifically want to focus on white supremacy, who upholds it and how, because I think that really ties it all together. This past week, we had city leaders minimize my public comment for pointing out that officers in Champaign-Urbana have brutalized and killed people. While the mayor made sure to point out that Urbana police have not killed anybody in 25 years, I want to refocus the point back on what the real issue is that I was getting at, which is the culture of police violence here and everywhere, and why white people protect it. The culture of police untouchability. The culture of, hold on lost my place. The culture of complacency around these issues that breeds a deep-seated inaction that has cost lives for centuries. Police and white supremacy are so intertwined, and that is the reason, consciously or not, why white people protect the police. Champaign-Urbana is policed by 4 different departments, so my apologies for getting the particulars mixed up. The murderous violence of police still stands. Their bloated budget and power still stands. The power the police have accumulated belongs back to the community, the money specifically. Tell me why the police have the biggest chunk of the city budget, $11 million, access to all these types of trainings and weapons, and they still don't want to prioritize de-escalation. In Urbana, you say we already have officers trained in racial bias training and trauma-informed practices, that we've expanded the police's roles over the years. So we've done all this without seeing solutions to our problems of gun violence, homelessness, or sexual harassment, assault, etc. Because the police don't solve these issues, but we have officials insisting that they deserve this money. We have city officials who will bend over backwards, spend tens of thousands of dollars to Hillard Hines to defend the police and their power before ever admitting that the distrust between police and citizens rightfully exists. I'm sure you heard that the president of the Chicago Police Union is now being called to resign after comments supporting the attack on the Capitol. 35 out of 50 Chicago alderpersons agreed that he should step down. Why do you think this man was in favor of Trump and his failed coup? Because he wanted a president who upholds racist, sexist, fascist power so he can feel safe in his male whiteness. I wonder if Urbana City Council would do the same if our police union said something in similar support. With the way 2020 went, I would say it's a fair ask to wonder if we're gonna just keep bowing our heads to the mayor, the state's attorney, chief seraphin, whoever. The National Fraternal Order of Police Union has been an open supporter of Donald Trump since 2016. And the Urbana police officers are allowed 120 hours a year to go to conventions and conferences hosted by police unions. Our city's money is being spent on these racist institutions. Why did Urbana agree to this when our limited money resources could be invested elsewhere? Speaking on that, I want to play a short clip from a panel over the summer. See if you can hear it.
Something that we don't want in our communities, right? I think this is a shared thing that we do want to de-escalate, but it just seems that our, doubling the police budget has not been a good solution. I mean, you have the stats, right? You have rising police budgets, you have rises in gun crime.
But budgets are going to increase over 22 years from 1998 to 2020. Salaries increase, numbers of officers increase, and police, the department is taking on different responsibilities as well. So I don't think it's valid to compare a budget from 1998 to 2020.
Last 10 years, and it's more than doubled in the last 10 years. Yeah. I think, the key phrase that came out in your response was that you've hired more officers and that you have officers expanding their roles in the work that they do. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're trying to shift the conversation, that we're investing in non-solutions that don't work. And so why don't we try something else that might be more cost effective to all of our taxpayers and that might actually decrease violence?
I am all for reallocating funding, and it's been brought up several times during this discussion.
Just want to say that I'm not going to forget that, and that was July, and it's now January. When are we going to reallocate those funds? / AKA defund the police. Thanks.
Next up is Haki.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I thought it was only 3 minutes like usually, but I just wanted to say a few words, echoing everything that was said prior to this. Usually I don't write when I do these speeches. I usually just speak from the heart and off the top of the head, but I wrote a few points that I believe I would like to mention. January 6, 2021, a day that will live in infamy, but to whom? It is a day that will live in infamy to white people that still fell victim to the false belief in the American project of American democracy. January 6th was as American as apple pie, as patriotic as the elite's role in the revolution of 1776 in order to birth the project of American patriotism. A patriotism constructed off the bodies of Black and indigenous peoples and drenched in the blood of Black and indigenous peoples. a patriotism that is indeed militarism, racism, and imperialism, the evil trinity that has been cloaked with the bastardized version of Christianity, i.e., baptizing capitalism and praying that God blesses America. I grew up in a different church. I grew up in Trinity United Church of Christ, and my pastor, Dr. Jeremiah A. Wright Jr., said, no, not God bless America, but God damn America, because it is in the Bible that all empires will have their fall. America will have its fall. The Roman civilization, their empire, had its fall. The British Empire, where the saying was, the sun never sets on Britain, that empire too fell. The French Empire fell off the impetus of Black people rising up in Haiti. Empires must fall. The chickens that Malcolm said are indeed coming home to roost, where the path for progress has truly come down to the ballot or the bullet. Black folks know of American patriotism that has denied our right to vote. And then when given the chance to exercise that right to vote, the power of whiteness, gone on to recess, allowed by every member of Congress, federal, state, and even local governments. Whiteness easily fought to remind us that they will not lose their power, even when they are not even losing power, as if Biden is actually going to fund the revolution against capitalism, racism, and fascism. Y'all have always had the power. That's why you can run into the Capitol. Whiteness went on recess. Whiteness went to play. Whiteness went on a trip, a field trip to invading the Capitol. January 6th. I wonder how many of you all attended the coup, a successful coup, because they were allowed to do it, and it just shows that fascism is knocking on the door. Or did you give acknowledgement to the coup by attacking Alita Lewis, simply being an officer at these times? Or even attending the Back the Blue rally, the ideology that is responsible for hurting white people's feelings. Yes, white feelings, white fragility. To my white allies, because this is your fight, not mine. Black folks laughed at the spectacle on Capitol Hill. Look beyond privilege and look at exploitation. Look beyond fragility and feel empathy, because what we witnessed on January 6th is what America's been doing to Black and brown countries across the world. It is American patriotism at its finest. If you were surprised at the theatrical spectacle of true Americanism, if you were surprised, it's because you were blind to it. And I end with this. We have a few more years before this happens again, but really successful. The lines are being drawn in American history. The empire will fall. What side will you be on? Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is well, actually, Reverend Underwood required some assistance. Is she still on? Dr. Underwood, did you want to speak? I see she's in attendance. I'm not. Okay, we'll come back to Dr. Underwood. All right, Christopher Hansen.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, I'm going to start off in a way that I usually don't start off, and commend Mayor Marlin for allowing something that looked more like free speech tonight. A month or two ago, Tracy Chong would have been muted for speaking just 1/4 of what she said tonight, and it's nice to see that the city is finally walking back its policy of muting people who are critical of the police. So I commend you for that. The mayoral appointments, I was actually excited to see someone from First Followers on that list until I realized that that person wasn't being assigned to the Human Relations Commission, which is what I at first thought. I strongly encourage the city to reach out to First Followers and see if maybe someone from that group would fill that very last seat on the Human Relations Commission. I think that would be meaningful. I was a little surprised to hear Chief Serafin mention that our police officers can't digest 500 pages of policy or whatever. Last time I checked, our UPD policy manual was 582 pages long. So I don't think there's much concern about, adding a few sentences here and there about de-escalation. And I need to remind the council that we're just talking about chapter 300 tonight. There's still, let's see, a lot of chapters that deal with force. 301, use of force boards. 302, handcuffing and restraints. 303, control devices and techniques. 304, tasers. 305, serious uses of force and in custody deaths. 306, firearms. 308, vehicle pursuits. 310, canines. 314, temporary custody of juveniles. There might be some more. So this is just a drop in the bucket, and this issue was brought up many times at council and in the police listening sessions, and it was just kind of set aside. So the real issue has been mentioned some, and that's with accountability. And I've been bringing this up for years in general and frequently in the past year in Urbana. I don't understand why we do this when we don't actually hold anyone accountable to the rules and policies that we have. It all just becomes a silly show. And Urbana has not shown itself to have really any accountability at all in our police department or anywhere else throughout our city with our staff and elected officials and employees. I was going to talk about some of the Open Meetings Act issues, but Tracy Chong mentioned those about the March 23rd meeting. If anyone wants to look at details of that, I've written an article on checkcu.org. The title for that article is called "The Time Mayor Marlin Skipped Public Input, Lied About It, Then Tried to Cover It Up." So if you want to read about that, you can go there and read about it. On to issues of FOIA. Yeah, I think Ms. Chong also mentioned those. Marlin said there was a huge increase in the volume of FOIA requests. I don't think 4% or whatever it was is a huge increase. And there's no evidence at all that the size of FOIA requests has increased recently. Nothing's been no evidence for that has been put forward. And as I keep telling the council, the significant resources put into FOIA are going into denying the records. If you just give people the records, it would be much less work, and it would also promote good governance at the same time. So, and I don't see that anything's been improved in the last few months. So I'm not sure what Marlon is talking about. And as a reminder, the vast majority of those requests and denials were in regards to police records. So. And I still don't understand why we're demonizing FOIA requesters. And I keep coming back to this analogy of children going to the library and trying to check out books. And I wonder if you would demonize those people, and it doesn't have to be children, adults, whoever goes to the public library to check out books. Would you demonize them for constantly asking for information at the library? Or would you celebrate the fact that they're taking a keen interest and are trying to digest all this material in order to improve the situation? So I'd urge you to stop demonizing people who try to access their government. It's a bad look for you, and it's bad governance for the people of Urbana.
Next up is Janet Elaine Guthrie.
Good evening. My name is Janet Elaine Guthrie. I am a resident of Urbana, and I have participated in both the listening sessions and some of the 10 shared principles discussions. I feel that we have made a step on the way, but I want to echo the comments from earlier this evening from the ACLU and the NAACP, as well as Mr. Eddie Pratt, all of them pointing to areas where we could and should considerably strengthen this draft policy. I am not consoled by the responses from the city to the public comments that were given, especially in the area of racial bias, implicit bias, which was one of the areas highlighted according to the chart that was distributed, and certainly was one of my primary points. It's not enough to say that all members of the department have received training. It is critical that it be pointed out that racial bias fits into this policy. that it needs to have constant attention and constant retraining. We are programmed in our society with respect to how we see people of different skin colors. And this is an undeniable fact. We have to work together and consistently to improve the way in which we eliminate bias. And we do that in part by de-escalation. And we should make it clear that de-escalation tactics are not used only when it is safe and prudent to do, a sentence that should be stricken from the draft policy. It is unnecessary and misleading because it takes away from what you are hearing from everyone, that de-escalation should be the first and prioritized response. De-escalation is what gives us time to pause, to think, to use our reflective capacity to overcome bias and some of the ways in which we might otherwise act. And it is also true that simply because someone leaves the scene, flees, because they are traumatized and scared, that it should not be up to an officer to decide whether that person will be a danger and pursue in a way that is not helpful. We do need a foot pursuit policy, and that is mentioned here. But we need more than just saying the department will look into it. You know, let's really take a look at what the public has said. Let's take time. There is time to make this a more robust and useful and fair and really reflective policy of whom we wish to be and what it means for us to follow the 10 shared principles. So it's only a start in my view. And I want to encourage the council to require a stronger response from the department going forward. Thank you all.
Thank you. Next up is Grace Wilkin.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah, yes, how's that?
That's better.
My name is Grace Wilkin. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an Urbana resident of Ward 6. Some comments about the new use of force policy. I think some of these changes are a good small start towards working on the issues, but there's obviously a lot more that I think needs to be done. These de-escalation techniques, I think you need to be used all of the time, not just when it's convenient. It's most important when someone is upset or maybe armed. That's maybe when the escalation is most important, not when it's a time to avoid using that tactic first, in my opinion. We also need to evaluate what we've been doing with police training. I've sat in on some UPD de-escalation trainings, and they've talked about the great police academy at the U of I, and I'm wondering if we're already doing this racial bias training for the past 10 years, as was in that question sheet. Has it had a positive impact, and what are those numbers? And what about the 64% of child arrests being Black children in 2019 and 94% Black children in 2020, as of what we heard in the summer? I'm also wondering what the consequences are when the use of force policy is violated, because without consequences, it's not impactful. I'm wondering what this progressive discipline policy is and what is its oversight. It's hard to take any of this seriously while there still has been nothing meaningfully done about the ridiculous charges against Aaliyah Lewis after being beaten by police, nothing done on following up about the misuse of a taser by police, and there's plenty of other statistics on racial and spatial disparities in policing in Urbana. I think the One Door program is another small but insufficient step. We need a more comprehensive plan with diverse and inclusive input, even with the pilot program. We need to address the issues within the entire system of our funding, culture, and distribution of resources. So what's the long-term goal? What are we working towards? We need a better vision for Urbana policing. And we need to get away from this policy that protects police from the excuse of suspicion, and to protect the citizens so that there's not a report of potentially shots fired or a person who might be armed or look suspicious, because that really puts our residents in danger. And that excuse of force, even deadly, it puts a lot of people in dangerous situations, and we've seen that too many times, especially people with mental illnesses and after a traumatic experience. That's really dangerous to go off of suspicions like that and jump to it. I think we need more training for that as well. But we really need to evaluate how it's working. I also wanted to recommend James Corbin for the appointment. I know you already voted on that, but I'm on that Sustainability Advisory Commission and appreciate accepting that nomination. I've worked with Tiger at First Followers, and I think that he'll be an excellent person to add to the commission, especially as we're working towards increasing diversity and inclusion in our commission, as I hope you are on the council as well. That's all for now. Thank you.
Diane?
Yes.
I'm not sure if we've gone over the hour for public input, but if we have, I'd like to make a motion to extend it.
I believe we started at 8:06.
All right. Can we extend public input? I'd like to make a motion to extend it for 30 minutes.
Certainly, I'll support that with a second.
And what was it extended to?
I think we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people left. So 6 times 4 is 24, so another half an hour.
Okay, we'll extend till 9:25. I guess we need to vote on that. Do we have a second?
I did.
Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey? Mr. Sachs?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
You're muted.
You're muted.
Yes, I know. I keep trying to hit the little space bar and it's not working.
Mr.
Yes.
Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Okay, we're extending public input to 9:25. Next up is Sarah Nixon.
Hello, this is Sarah Nixon, and thank you for the opportunity to address the Urbana City Council this evening. I want to say that I love the Imagine Urbana campaign. What I've seen of it so far is inspiring. The graphic design visuals are an exciting improvement over the rather dreary logo and branding that Urbana has had for years. Light bulbs, they convey ideas, bright lights, energy. And Urbana is a city that has an amazing community of brilliant academics, artists, visionary entrepreneurs, far-seeing social justice innovators, talented youth, and so much more. And the new slogan, Imagine Urbana, communicates the diversity, openness, open-mindedness, genius, and creativity that I think we all feel really distinguishes this city. Aesthetics do matter. Content and follow-through, though, is most crucial. And I hope the Imagine Urbana team continues to infuse this fresh and bright approach into the serious business of planning and executing the comprehensive plan for Urbana. After all, light bulbs also convey the clarity and transparency that the community is calling for. Light bulbs eliminate obscurity and shed light on what had been concealed under darkness. The plan update released by the city last month underscores policies for arts and culture, transportation, land use, housing, recreation, economic development, and the environment. Missing from the list is criminal justice, reform in policing, racial and restorative justice. We're not seeing in the plan a priority goal for the development of businesses and social services in Urbana's marginalized neighborhoods. We're not seeing in the plan the issue of crisis response alternatives. Let's add these, and let's add community engagement and discussion surrounding the issues of domestic violence, family violence, child abuse, substance abuse, mental health, and homelessness. Your engagement plan lists priorities of determining, quote, outreach tools necessary to reach all populations, identifying voices throughout Urbana, and reaching out to potential community partners, end quote. Well, have you considered reaching out to the folks who show up at your meetings week after week after week to engage, to offer our sincere and relevant feedback, research, experiences, insights, and input? We are one group of many that the city could be actively inviting to the table, rather than formulating measures to censor and limit our input. And finally, with regard to police de-escalation, we heard little to nothing tonight that even touched upon training in racial bias informed, gender bias informed, trauma informed, domestic violence informed, and mental health informed approaches. But these are critical to successful de-escalation practices. None of those approaches were in evidence when the officers attacked Elia Lewis for trying to walk away from terrorizing, rifle juggling, screaming men who clearly were not handling the crisis situation competently. And their misconduct resulted in the re-victimization, re-traumatization, and wrongful criminalization and ugly character assassination of an innocent, traumatized, African-American domestic violence victim. That was an escalation of failure. You're asking Urbana to trust that the new de-escalation policy and the one-door program are solutions. But before the city can earn the community's trust, it needs to own up to its failure to protect and serve Miss Elia Lewis in her time of crisis. You know what to do. Drop the charges. Apologize to Miss Lewis, and by extension to the Black community, and compensate her for escalating her injuries and her trauma.
Thank you. Next up is Christopher Evans.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think the use of force policy in Urbana has to have a strict prohibition against using force in reaction to a citizen's words. And if you look at most of the cases in Champaign County where officers used excessive force and citizens were paid a substantial amount of money for that force locally, you'll see that what officers react with force based strictly on a citizen's words. I have a number of cases that I could go over, but for the sake of time, I want to highlight particularly two because we can see them on YouTube. The first is in 2011, a case where African Americans were jaywalking on Campus Town. Patrick Simons, Champaign police officer, pulled his car toward them, exited his car with a canister-sized amount of pepper spray, grabbed one of the jaywalkers, escorted him to the front of his squad car, and then in reaction to and as the person was asking, why am I being stopped, he was pepper sprayed directly in the face. Later in the video, when asked by the victim, why did you pepper spray me? The officer admitted, because you were, quote, jaw jacking. He is later taken into a parking lot, and when he refuses to give his ID, he is attacked again in the back seat. That was from 2011. They paid him $40,000 for his suffering. There's the other case I want to point to, and if you type in Champaign police brutality, you can see that video on YouTube. Another case that I want to highlight, and there are many more beyond this, but another case for the sake of time was a case in 2018 where officers were called to a disturbance. They knocked on a person's apartment door, and you can watch as the officers try de-escalation at first. We just want to talk to you as the conversation goes, and as the person is getting angry, just by the mere virtue of his words, officers then pushed him back, threw him again across the hallway, and smashed his face against the doorknob. He was paid $220,000. That's the case of Alton Corey. If you type in Alton Corey on YouTube, you can see that. So I would really strongly urge the council and the chief to put in that officers cannot use force in reaction to a citizen's words. And that is the main thing that needs to be in our use of force policy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
How'd I do?
Next up is Rita Connerly.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good evening. So my name's Rita Connerly. I'm a citizen in Champaign, and I'm calling very disappointed, in disbelief, and even more afraid for our Urbana citizens, especially our citizens of color in marginalized communities and or have had previous police interactions. It is concerning that at a time when our country is fighting white supremacy, you still present this use of force policy. So you release an amended use of force policy after what we've witnessed as a nation on Wednesday, and you still don't prioritize de-escalation. The Department of Justice defines de-escalation as the strategic slowing down of an incident in a manner that allows officers more time, distance, space, and tactical flexibility during dynamic situations on the street. You do know that several police departments and officers across the country are currently under investigation for the treason acts committed against the US government last week. How tone deaf can this city be? Are you listening, Diane? You are using your self-interest, personal hyperbole, and false viewpoints to continue to make decisions that adversely affect our Black and Brown citizens. The Congressional Black Caucus has introduced a new comprehensive police accountability bill. Chairperson Karen Bases has stated, what we are witnessing is the birth of a new movement in our country, with thousands coming together in every state, marching to demand a change that ends police brutality, holds police accountable, and calls for transparency. House Bill 163, which the element qualified immunity for officers, could change criminal justice policies and policing. It eliminates officers' rights to collective bargaining, allows officers to be punished or terminated based off the complaint system, and defunds any department that does not comply 100% with the legislation. I'm only noting a few of the things as it is an expansive bill, over 600 pages, and I'm sure Diane has not read. The fact that you will bring the use of force is counteractive to the Senate and House bill. You're not a leader, and you do not care about your community. What I'd like to ask, are you related to Mary Miller? Your policies seem to reflect how you are acting here locally. What I do want to do is thank all of our white counterparts who have called in expressing their concerns regarding this policy, because it is their voice that amplifies the need for change. Thank you.
Next up is Justin Hendricks.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Justin Michael Hendricks, CU resident, Parkland College student, creator Hidden Homeboy, the People's Mayor, writing candidate for District 3 in Champaign. I want to begin by saying we have a community closet located at 202 South Broadway. Please donate and make space for our most vulnerable populations. Moving forward, I will say it's great we are discussing racism and implicit bias. However, this language is very apprehensive and detrimental. It's instilled in the fear of Jim Crow, redlining, segregation, birth of a nation, and downright malicious. When will we stop creating laws and policies that protect the people who are behind the badge and not those before the badge? This sounds very much like a Champagne 1970s home rule. What was the point of these study sessions and police discussions? It seems like it was used to gain knowledge of the community's fears to ensure that red and blue lights reign over Black and brown bodies. Knowing that the state's attorney and others are denying a systemic self-fulfilling prophecy is only here to save a supremacy that isn't reflective of the people in handcuffs, incarcerated, or even murdered. The records of force reflect as accountability is absent. If your ego is that hurt, you have no other choice but to resort in physical force. Somebody should not have completed the application process to be a police officer, let alone taking an oath that is used to kill, steal, and destroy. This is why we are pushing House bills such as 163 SA to defund the police and more. Give me the loot, my community needs even more. Aaliyah Lewis, we lift you up. Stay strong, be confident, remain encouraged. Megan McDonald, I applaud you for everything you're doing big in the trenches for a Black young person, a Black young woman who was attacked by an assumption or best judgment to protect and serve, as we're told. Drop the charges. In closing, Mr. Colebrook, the next time you arrive to a situation that I'm involved in, it's at best you have your cards and information on you. And the same should be done for the officers at Parkland College who work under you, as they too are complicit in misconduct, refusing to have information when requested. I'll leave you with this thought. Imagine if our protests were allowed the same privileges as those we seen that invaded the Capitol, because only thing we see is bodies hit the floor. So Urbana, let's clean it up and stop continuing your grandfather's history. Thank you.
Next up is James Corbin.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, first I'd like to say thank you for the appointment to the Sustainability Advisory Commission. I promise to do my best advocating and representing for individuals such as myself who are underrepresented in these type of forums. I hope to bring insight on policies and changes that affect marginalized groups such as myself. Thank you, Mayor Marlin. Thank you, Council. And I look forward to sitting down, and talking with everyone on a continuous basis. With that being said, on the de-escalation part with the police, I would like to just say that it's easy to juxtapose things which are completely opposite, meaning the relationship between people of color and authority figures such as the police. This is an asymmetrical relationship in regards to one having power and one without any power or lack of power. Also, we dealing with untold racial bias. And these biases seem to seep into pretty much everything that we do in this country, as we just seen as of January 6th. And I'm not sure, I know what everybody else seen, but what I really saw was the canary in the coal mine, which tells me that we had a lot of middle-class white individuals able to penetrate one of the most secure areas in the world. You can't even get there. They had a incident where a young lady in a car, Black young lady in a car, was shot, who even tried to drive close. So with that being said, we know that white privilege exists, and there's power just in the skin tone, just as there's a lack of power in someone of a darker hue. So with these being said, we need to take in just understand when these type of policies are put forth, if there is an accountability session or a section involved with these type of policies, as well as just being able to really just really give the truth of the matter then I don't think you're going to see much change happen until accountability is there. And I'm not going to take up much more of your time again, but just thank you for the opportunity. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to serve. Next up is Jaya Colasetti.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So again, my name is Jaya Colasetti. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I had the privilege of speaking to City Council last week about concerns related to the one-door policy. And I just wanted to briefly echo a lot of the concerns that have been raised today. I think we're hearing again that Urbana residents are asking for a comprehensive plan for police reform, that this plan does not address some of the concerns about racial bias that have been raised, that does not adequately address de-escalation training that is needed. And I will say that I have conducted training at the Police Training Institute around trauma-informed care and interviewing for survivors of sexual assault. I know that there's important work that's being done there, but there's also an examination of what doesn't work. Part of the reason I started doing trainings at the Police Training Institute was to assess the efficacy of their bias training and the impact on empathy of officers. And I think it's important to take a look at not only what our community is saying, but what are the evidence-based practices to make sure that we are creating a safer community for all of us. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We have Minnie Pearson. Do you want to finish your thought from last time?
Basically what I want to say, this is Minnie Pearson, NAACP, Champaign County branch. There are a lot of things in this document, but there's also not a lot of things that should be there that it's not there. And I don't think we should rush this. I think we should actually take our time and go back and consider all of the input from the community, because as we are looking at the current things that are happening in our society today, it causes us some great concerns. And people that are participating in what happened in our capital, these people came from all over the world. And our police departments really are given a lot of power. And with that power comes responsibilities and also consequences for not following the policies that are set up. And it should not be in favor of the police. It should be protecting and serving all people, not just reinforcing the policies when it comes to people of color. So this policy draft that you have, a lot of things in it, but I think we need a little bit more experience in listening and implementing what our community is trying to communicate to us. So with that in mind, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Okay, there are no more hands raised at this point, so we will go back to end up with any follow-up council comments.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yes.
So Bryant, you had mentioned that this is due to be updated on January 31st to comply with some grant requirements. Is there, can it only be updated in January, or are there opportunities throughout the year to do a bigger update?
So I don't know that I know the answer to your question. I know, and we can find that out. I know that that was part of the concern. Like I said, this was launched, I want to say back in October, and we knew the listening sessions were coming up. So I can't imagine there's not any way to get in later down the line. And truth be told, policies change. So it gets certified and then, hey, something happens and we want to change some things. I don't know that I know the answer to recertification. So if it's certified and then we added another page, or we did this or that, I'm guessing that there's some sort of resubmission process. I think anytime I've been involved in certifications, whether it's been homicide investigators or whatnot, the first push, the biggest push, is always the most cumbersome and unwieldy, as all the departments, whatever there are 1,000+ departments in the state of Illinois, try to get through this.
Well, we'll find out what options are available. And actually, several people, mentioned the bill that's in the Illinois General Assembly. There's an entire section on that relates to use of force, and a discussion of mandatory use of force, a statewide mandatory use of force policy. So there will be changes coming in the future, but we'll find out what the options are. Sharice.
I guess the question I wanted to ask then is, are you saying that you can't pass I mean, I know this draft isn't the final draft. You're still, taking input and so on and so forth. So my question is, are you saying you can't amend after you've submitted this for certification? You don't know if you can amend it or not?
So I believe the answer to that's going to be yes. I can't imagine they're not going to take an updated policy. I'd like to try to get one in by the time frame, so that indeed, okay, we've got a placeholder, and then if we go and we change, what I'd like to find out is what's sort of the resubmission or the amendment process. And again, I don't know if all the powers that be with regards to that process know all of those answers yet, but we can reach out.
No, I asked that because I found it also interesting, and kind of also agree with the somebody said that and I can't remember who, I tried to take notes as I went, that the de-escalation should be a first priority. Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. I think that we always, at least I was taught, that what you want to do first is to try to find out what the issue is, and try to de-escalate it as much as possible. That's what kept me from being suspended in school, by trying to have a conversation here, so when I don't think that it is hurtful to try to push that forward as much as possible, that de-escalation be the first priority. And I know that not every police situation will even, because I'm not the one going into dangerous situations. So I do know that not every police situation will allow maybe for concerted, I mean, like a lot. But I do think, and I do believe that, sometimes when, because there's always two sides to that. And I do believe that when given an opportunity, because of the fact that in these situations, it is really kind of the police force that determines the amount of time that how something's going to take. There's no hurry to bring somebody in. You have that control. So you can use the time to try to de-escalate a situation if possible, especially if it may possibly end up with injury or loss of life for either of the parties. And maybe that just a better definition and some of the suggestions that the public had, I would say, please take that into consideration when you are retyping this and changing that. So, but the other thing that concerns me is that if we want to, I think if we want to, I know you've got a deadline. What would happen if we don't meet that deadline?
We wouldn't be, the leverage is grant money release. I don't know exactly. So for instance, over the years, we've applied for the JAG grant and some of those things. That would, my understanding is that's where their leverage is. Again, I don't think we can say, hey, listen, we'll take some of the initial input and we push this in, and then it gets certified, and then we have to, a couple months later resubmit. Again, it's going to be about the grant funding is the leverage.
Okay, so my other question is that is it at all possible then that while you're putting this together that you do try to consider adding the consequences regarding if policies are not kept and the de-escalation, pushing it more forward as far as your use of force policies?
Yeah, I think we can get some references in there and make the language better. Yes, with regards to both counts.
And it can be reordered. And actually, when you reflect on the statistics where the police have 25 to 30,000 encounters a year or calls for service a year, use of force is employed in 100 to 150 instances. So that means in 99.5% of the time, police are using something other than force to resolve a situation. So in truth, in practice, de-escalation is already top priority in all but maybe 0.5% of the encounters that the police have with the public. It can be better. And of course, it's low incidence but high impact. But there shouldn't be any problem in reordering and re-emphasizing de-escalation in our policy, because in fact, that is what's happening in practice.
And
so we can make our policy, we can emphasize that in the policy, absolutely. And I want to give some other folks a chance to comment. Sharice, and I'll come back to you. Anyone else have a bill?
Yeah, thanks, Chief, for bringing this to us. I know it was important for all of us to get the de-escalation in there. I do think that because the use of force policy is maybe one of the only policies that a lot of people read that aren't the officers. I think it does set the tone and contributes to developing a culture of respect. If we're aware that the police are going to be emphasizing de-escalation, I think it would go a long way. So I agree with pretty much everyone else that de-escalation needs to take a more prominent role in the policy. I think some of the language is a little overly cautious. I imagine the attorneys have put it in extra shoulds and, things like that. But I would say you don't need should and feasible in the same sentence where it says tactical de-escalation should be used wherever feasible. I think you could say must be used where feasible, because feasible already gives you enough direction on when it can be used. So a few things like that when you're going through, if you can make it a little bit more, just a little firmer. I think the comment about firing into a building, I have seen that in other use of force policies. I didn't see it in this one. I may have missed it, but firing blindly into a building, I think should definitely not, it would be worth pointing out that that's not allowed. So the other thing on training, I think where it says periodic training, I'd like to see that more specific, if possible, annual training, maybe a little bit about type of training. And then on the reviews, the video reviews the lieutenants and sergeants do, it specifies more cases, more video review. I think that's great, but it doesn't really say what happens with that. Like, it says they review it, but it doesn't say if there are concerns or if there's suggestions, you know, review it with the officer involved. I think sometimes there's a lot of things where, you know, the decisions are reasonable, but there's other reasonable decisions that could also have been taken. And I think someone with experience, an experienced officer, kind of mentoring the other officers using the videos is like you'd use a football game day video, I guess, go over it and say, you know, how this could have been better, what you did right and what you did wrong. If I assume some of that's being done, but if that was in the use of force policy in the video review, I think that would help too. So I think that's my main comments. I encourage you to follow up with ACLU and NAACP and take the language concerns seriously that they have.
Very good. Thanks, Bill.
Jared.
Three things. One, I wanted to ask if either Carol, you, Diane, or Chief are aware of the comments submitted by Jane McClintock over the weekend. She sent comments addressed to City Council and to the mayor on Saturday.
Yes.
Okay. Because she provided a very comprehensive and reasonable document that I think offers a lot of really, really great edits. I just wanted to make sure you all were aware of the document that she had made. Another question, we had talked about this in theory when we were you know, discussing where and how this was going to get edited many times, Chief, but what, you know, and Christopher Hansen brought it up in public comment, but what is the future of all the related policies of force?
So we traditionally go over policies every so often. As a matter of fact, we started prior to at the very beginning of 2020, I believe it was, going through all of the policies. I've been through a handful of rewrites in my time where we go and we take a look at these, and you look at especially some of the most important policies, whether it's pursuit driving, use of force, those are those policies. So yes, those are part of our review, and so I can't, we're in the middle of it right now, so I don't know. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head exactly if those have been looked at, or more importantly, to your point, is I think how does this instruct on those, and does what we've done here and some of this, how do we make those other ones better? And so I guess I don't have a solid answer for you other than I know that we're in the middle of a rewrite. Any time that a policy gets redone, it gets pushed back out. And then there's an acknowledgement process for the officers and all of those kinds of things. So I guess with regards to those other ones, they'll have to be looked at again after we get to some level of stopping point on this one.
Okay, because I really did, you know, depending on how this ends up, and of course with what's pending in state legislation, you know, a lot of what's said in here, I feel like could have direct impact on those policies as well. So I was just curious. And then one other, I mean, people have made a gazillion good points, and there are a ton of good comments that have been submitted even after the fact, and I hope that you guys will take all of those into serious consideration. I do look forward to seeing the final version of this, and I do commend the work that's been done on it. It is a step in the right direction, a small step as though it may be. But what I want to ask, since we're asking about this, and it's a continuing concern of mine, one of which I elicited to in an email to everyone over the weekend, is how this was brought to council, and why is it that when it comes to policies of the police that they're non-actionable items by the city council? Why is it that, you know, I can learn all the nuance of zoning ordinance And, every little minutia that goes into whether or not we make a good decision on a ZBA appeal or on a plan case. But for some reason, police policies are just beyond council's comprehension, and we're not allowed to vote on them. We're not allowed to set them or deal with them in the same way that we deal with other highly complex issues that come before the city. One that arguably impacts people far more than, for example, a complicated zoning ordinance. And I know this is an administrative choice because I believe if we were working within the legal frameworks allowed by the law, we'd be allowed to set policies. I'm not suggesting that we should set policies that supersede the law, and hopefully the state legislature is going to change some of that. But that's what I want to know is why it comes this way. Why is this non-actionable to council? You're taking our suggestions, and that's great, but why the non-action? Why always just a presentation without action?
Carol, did you want to respond to that?
Well, I'll take a stab at giving you an answer, and maybe you have to remember this is coming from a place of somebody who's worked in government for a while. There's a distinction between a code like a zoning ordinance and an operational policy of the government. So we have all kinds of operational policies around the fire department, around the police department, around public works, and so forth. And all the operational types of things are typically the prerogative of the executive, the mayor. And a legislative body sets sort of the broad policy framework. And I know the word policy is used in multiple ways here, but there's the broad framework, which is what is appropriate to the legislature. And then there's, as I said, there's this operational aspect. And to me, I see that very clearly, that distinction. And again, it's because I'm inside the government and I can see what's an operational item. It's some of the division that of responsibilities that the mayor and I have sorted between us. I'm responsible for the operational side of the government. She's responsible for the policy side and the more public-facing policy decision-maker side. So not to say that those things don't ever intersect, they often do. But to me, it's a very bright line. It's probably not so bright for members of the public, but it's also, once you start to get into the operational side of the government, it's very hard to draw the line of how far to go. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's I feel that's responsive to your question.
Well, it is, because I think it also, the public, as you say, doesn't understand why this is operational in a zoning ordinance is not operational. In my mind, they both directly influence the operations of the city. I mean, the amount of nuance to draw between the two, I guess, is for the pros. But would you agree that it is by choice, but not by mandates, that we choose to operate in that way?
I think I'll ask maybe our legal counsel can weigh in on this.
Yeah, I don't know if Dave, this might be something that he'd like to reflect on. But I mean, it's a question. I don't know that there's a strong distinction, and this is something that maybe we could have Dave do some research on. Maybe there's some guidance, but it's a question of what's the role of the executive, what's the role of the legislature?
Well, in my understanding of my reading of, mayor aldermanic forms of government, because, in a strong mayor government, it functions differently than a mayor aldermanic form of government. In my reading of that, we do share some of those responsibilities from my understanding. And, I don't want to get into too much into that, but that's a big question that I have, and a big concern that I have, because it does have a direct effect on how we set policy for police. Because if a policy is an operational directive, but the ordinance regarding zoning is not an operational directive, I need to understand from the city's perspective how those two things differ and why we're not allowed to have a direct say in one, but we're allowed to have a direct say in the other. Because I think it's important not only for us, but it's also important for the citizens to understand how our government functions and why it chooses to go about things the way that it does.
So we'll spend some time trying to flesh that out a little bit more, because that's a worthwhile subject to explore.
Okay. Well, I would encourage you guys to really look at what Jay McClintock had sent over. I think her comments and suggestions are extremely astute and extremely reasonable, and I'm sure that the stuff that Minnie Pearson and the ACLU sent over as well can be treated as such. Thank you.
We'll be taking all of these comments into consideration and to heart. Bill Colbert.
Yeah, I just want to weigh in a little bit on some of the comments. I think our job as council is more of an advising consent role. I think, and I've talked about this before, to stay in our own lane and not get in the way of content experts. I'm speaking as a whole. We as the council are not content experts on policing. Of course, all of you would probably acknowledge after 35 years, I probably know a little bit about it, but I reserve my comments and let Chief Sarevin speak for Urbana Police Department. I think it's the role of the police department to set policy for the police department. As an example, there is some members have expressed to me that perhaps school resource officers should not carry pistols. If we as a council set policy in this scenario, that school resource officers should not carry pistols, you're not going to have any school resource officers. For the same analogy, we don't set policy for public works. If you take a 55,000-pound truck loaded with salt with a steel blade on the front, going down an icy road in the city, that could easily cut a car in half, could kill somebody. We don't set policy on how city public works employees drive salt trucks, but that's what they do. It's an analogy, maybe a bad one. We let the content experts write policy for their department. I believe we consent and advise. Thanks.
Any other comments? Dennis.
Yeah, I would like to chime in a little bit. I also thought that the review and the markup that Jane McClintock had shared with the community was extremely smart and echoed a lot of the opinions that I was getting as I reviewed the document myself. So I recommend that we review those and add those, just as I thought that Carol Spindell offered a lot of really good thoughts to our discussion tonight. And it occurred to me, and I was wondering about this, how a policy that is affecting the police department in our community is being presented, and yet it would be, I think, a tremendous step in showing the partnership that we have with the community itself if this presentation wasn't given just by the chief of police, but a presentation was given in joint partnership with the voices in our community who are most affected by it. And I would really love to see members of the Black community here to comment and advise this council about the most grievous concerns that they are looking at in their community and how they want them to be addressed. And we're getting their information and their advice sort of secondhand. And it's not really being filtered, and it's not obvious that we're getting it because we're being spoken to by the chief of police of our department, who's well-trained, but he's also very opinionated in certain directions by training and probably by experience. But what the community is really talking about is where have the voices that they have, where is that reflected in this document? So that's why we're having this conversation with so many individuals tonight. They're trying to say that there's other ways of looking at the solutions. And I really want to be respectful and listen to those new takes on what the policy can be. And if it turns out that the certification process that our Chief Serafin has been very concerned about, if the process is merely to rubber stamp a seal of approval on a document in time so that we can apply for funding, that's not a very significant, great need in my mind to not get this right or better. I don't know if the certification is that they check all of the policy against some kind of giant standard in the federal government or not, but I doubt that. I have a feeling that they just want to see the time code on the document that we got it in by the deadline. And if that's true, I'm not concerned about getting in by the deadline as much as I am concerned that the policy really reflects the needs of our community.
Mary Alice, and then Eric.
I just kind of wanted to comment that one of the things that I talked about this summer was that the use of force policy was kind of top of mind in terms of something that we needed to be working on. So I'm really happy to have us, at least at this point that we're at right now. I think there's been significant change to the policy. I think Bill and Sharice's comments, I agree with them in terms of pretty much everything that they said tonight. I've spent quite a bit of time going through both the old policy and the new policy and highlighted all the changes between the different documents. I'm going to go through, based on tonight's comments from the public, relook at that document, and I'll send you some suggestions on my thoughts in terms of the specifics, but I don't want to waste people's time in terms of all the little nitty-gritty details in the document.
Thank you. Eric.
It seems to me that the ACLU and the NAACP are the kinds of organizations that would have the resources and expertise to make quite good and specific recommendations. And I would hope that those conversations and perhaps meetings could happen. I could think of nothing better outcome-wise than to have a situation where the police department and those two organizations put out a statement saying that they worked together and came to an agreement about, for a policy that they thought was better in putting the community on the right track forward. I don't think it'll be perfect. It's not like everyone's going to agree on every point, but it's a process. I'm sure these are the kinds of things that get revisited over time. But I think those two organizations could benefit the policy and the community.
I agree with you 100%, and we'll be pursuing that this week. Any final comments? Sharice.
Yeah, I've got one final comment. I listened very carefully while a few young Black gentlemen spoke about their issues regarding the whole racial bias thing. And in a lot of ways, I am in agreement. So when Dennis says, he's wondering where the voices of the Black community are, you're not the only one wondering, because I wonder as well. But I can speak for what, I can only speak for what is in my head, which is the one thing that I know is that I cannot read somebody else's mind when we are hiring police I think it is the most important thing is to get their opinion on race relations and history of what they've experienced or how they see the police. And that may be a way of weeding out people that have any kind of implicit bias, but we all have implicit bias in one way or another. That is something that is that makes us human. It is one thing that we have to recognize that this country, the founding of this country is based on. So after 200, 300, 400 years of looking at a group as inferior, it is not something that is going to be erased in a summer. It is something that when I experience the police, I have my history that I go from and how I'm going to deal with them. Other people have theirs. And whether that has been helpful for me or not, I don't know, because I've never had a police officer call me outside of my name. I've never had a police officer come at me and in a violent manner. Now it could be based on what my reaction is, because that's what I can control. I can't control theirs. All I know is that I try to do what I can do to get home safely, because I know what the history of that particular institution is regarding people, Black folk. In my neighborhood, as many people, white folk, I might add, that come up talking about police, and defund the police. In the past 3-4 months, I have called the police personally because of shots fired. One time during the day, while I was outside weeding my house, my mother's property, at 2:30 in the afternoon, 15 shots. So I'm not looking to defund the police. Do I think that there should be some, that there could be funding that goes toward helping to either train or help the mentally ill? That's what One Door is all about. But when I'm, here in my home with my mother, and it's 4:30 in the morning, and gunshots wake me up, and I'm hearing them a block west of my house, I'm not going out with my little piece of a FOID card looking for nobody. So somebody has to do that job. When I hear gunshots at 2 in the morning or 10:30 at night, even if it's just around the corner, and me being the alderman, the smart thing does not say for me to get in my mom's car to go see what happened. And so I would like to hear more from my ward. And I know that Black folks don't just live in 3rd Ward anymore. There are plenty of Black folks that live in Jared's ward too. And there's plenty of shootings and murders and stabbings and everything else that have happened over in that area. And I would like to hear also more of what it is that they feel that is important. And I think that would be very helpful to the chief also, is what they think should be prioritized as well. So thank you, Dennis, for bringing that up.
Okay.
I've
Well,
had that in my house as well. Right outside the block of my home, and I've been out there too, looking at what's going on here. I have concerns.
Okay, as far as next steps, we've gotten a great deal of input, both here in the meeting plus in the emails. We'll be taking that into account. There will be some changes made. We will be meeting this week with some stakeholders and come up with a revised policy. We'll bring it back for you'll see, we'll bring it back. And believe me, we'll take everything that we heard tonight into account. So thank you very much to everyone who submitted comments, who've participated in this process, and it is a work in progress. One thing I wanted to let people know before we move on to we'll move on to reports of standing committees. Actually, unfinished business, there is none. Reports of standing committees, there's nothing from the committee of the whole this week. Reports of special committees. No. I wanted to let people know that the Martin Luther King Day celebration this year is all virtual due to COVID. It will be on Sunday, January 17th, 2021. So that's next Sunday, 3 o'clock. Everyone's invited to Zoom in. And if you want to get the link, it's at mlkcelebration.org. Special this year is who's getting one of the awards. And our Urbana resident, Ricardo Diaz, is the 2021 Susan Freiberg James Burgess Humanitarian Award. Ricardo is being recognized for his many activities, including he serves as the chair of the board of directors for the New American Welcome Center, but he also chairs our Civilian Police Review Board. And along with Ricardo, Karen Sims, Reverend Willie Comer, and Jennifer Roscoe are also being recognized. So the countywide celebration is being consolidated into the Sunday afternoon event. That's committees, reports of officers. I wanted to also give you a little update on COVID-19 related activities. First of all, you probably are aware that 2 community vaccination sites have been opened 3 days this week. They had about 2,000 to 3,000 doses of the vaccine to distribute. They took appointment only reservations, which were quickly filled. So we'll see how that goes. And hopefully what's still unpredictable as far as the vaccine is the distribution end of thing. When it's going to come to the community, how many doses people are going to get. So it's really hard to plan these sorts of things. But these first 2 community vaccination events are being held this week, and we expect many more. The city of Urbana is working with the U of I for us to discuss the strategic rollout of the saliva test. And we hope to be able to utilize that for employees. Our firefighters are already participating through the U of I because of their connection to the U of I. They have access to the saliva testing, but no one else does. The city also has gone ahead, and we are going to be utilizing the rapid antigen test. You get results in 15 minutes. And that's going to be administered here at the city building to employees. And the 2 types of testing, the rapid antigen test and then the saliva test, will probably be used together. Antigen test isn't quite as reliable as saliva testing, but you get the results back much faster, which means if you test people especially if you have first responders testing when they come in at the beginning of their shift, they can get the results right away. If they do test positive, it means they will not be on their shift with other employees. We currently have, I don't have the final numbers as of today, but we have more than 10, I'd say 10 to 20 employees who are out due to COVID or COVID-related exposures. So it's still having a significant impact on city employees. Next week, we're going to bring to you a summary of the financial assistance that has been distributed through the Community Development Block Grant Funds, plus the CARES funding to businesses. So you'll be getting an update from Community Development and from our grants management area. And on the liquor control end of things, liquor license related end of things, we have one bar in Urbana who had a health permit suspended due to its failure to comply with COVID regulations. They promised to close. Their health permit was restored. They apparently have decided to reopen again in violation of state compliance or the mitigation measures. So we are going to be dealing with this particular bar this week. On the whole, though, our restaurants, our bars, our businesses have been just remarkable in their compliance and the fact that they put public health top priority, and I truly appreciate that. But we spend a great deal of time on a very few locations, and that takes time. So we finally, the governor expects to announce, I think it's on January 15th, possibility of some regions moving out of the mitigations. Whether or not tier 6 moves out of mitigation is going to be a combination of our positivity rate, our transmission rate, plus our hospital capacity. We're doing real well on positivity rates. It's much more challenging to meet the hospital capacity criteria in order to get out of our mitigations. So we'll see how we're doing on Friday. Don't know yet. And that, I think, wraps up all I have to do on COVID. Any other announcements from staff? Nope. Okay, well, with no further business before this body, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.